years ago, we had lots of customers that were that way, and we had to, and I'm sure Dylan probably has this to a much larger degree, where we had certain instruments that would measure the thickness of a metal or a piece of a part. And, we had to have those calibrated ever so often and have paperwork to show that it's calibrated, to make sure that we had all of our stuff, like sometimes to up the fraction of the thickness of a piece of notebook paper, which just blows my mind.
Wow.
And then, of course, if you're a surgeon, we want the surgeons to be really detailed, right? If they're working on our bodies.
Yeah. I'm definitely not gonna be no surgeon.
So, okay, good. I'm glad we're filling in here. We'll get started here in here pretty quick. Any burning questions or comments before I get started from the rest of you guys that have just joined us? Okay. Well, I'm super excited that we are in our final. I'm sure you guys are way more excited than me. I've
Mhm.
enjoyed this, but of course I'm not, in the trenches like you guys are. So I'm sure you're excited that we're in the final week of this, and just I want to encourage you, just keep pressing on. I do not that this next week is easy. I do think that week number 3 is the hardest. And I would love, like, after you guys complete this course, if you guys, if you have a different thought, if you think that week 4 is harder, if you think week 2 is harder, I'd be really interested to know what you guys think, and, what your thoughts are. And if you guys have any suggestions on how we can teach this class better, or if there was a different resource that you could use, I would love to hear that. Or if there's something, that I could do to make things better or make it easier, if you guys have some piece of advice, if you have something like, well, I wish I would have known this, or I wish I would have had that. I would love to hear what you guys have to say. So try to make it better. Okay, real quick before we jump into the actual problems, and I do have quite a few problems that we're going to go through. But I thought I would like for you guys to see how to work through some of the problems that I think are a little bit more difficult for this particular week. But I wanted to show you guys real quick. You guys may have figured out, even if you have an iPhone, if you don't have a scientific calculator, because these are kind of expensive, if you don't have one of these with all the functions, if you rotate your phone this way, it turns it into a scientific calculator. Have you guys seen that? Did you guys know that? You have to make sure you have so when you pull up your normal calculator on your iPhone, and I would assume the Android phones have something similar, but when you have it here, you have a normal calculator, but then when you turn it this way, you have more functions that are available to you. And yes, okay, so here's something interesting is you will have to do some exponents this week. And when you're doing the exponents, so if I'm trying to not turn my thing around here. If you're entering something in, let's say you need to find 4 to the third power. Well, let's say we're trying to find 4 to the fourth power. What you do is you actually type the number 4, and then you find the button that has its XY. And my XY button is on the second row, 1, 2, 3, 4 over. It's this button right here. So then you would hit XY. And if I'm saying 4 to the fourth power, I would hit 4 and then enter. So then it gives me 256, which is 4 to the fourth power, which is the same thing as 4 times 4 times 4 times 4. So that is a simple way to do that. And again, you turn your calculator that way and it turns it into a really cool little scientific calculator. So if I wanted to find 5 to the sixth power, I would type in 5 and then XY, and then type in 6 to the sixth power, my equal sign, and then it gives me the answer 15,625. So that would be 5 to the sixth power. Any questions about that? Also, you will want to use the scientific version of your calculator, because There are a couple of problems, so we're not going to go over the specific problems this evening, but on a couple of the problems, it actually tells you how to enter the information. It's a pretty complicated problem, I think in chapter 11, but it actually says here's the series that you enter into your calculator, but it has to be a scientific calculator. And it includes parentheses. So, you don't have the parentheses available to you on this normal calculator, but over here you do. So when you enter the series of stuff in for those particular problems where it gives you those series, you'll want to turn your phone this way so you can access that scientific version of it. And you'll use your parentheses. You will use that x to the y power, which is the exponents, and a couple of other different functions. So it's just a little quick little tip, and it should make your life easier this week if you can do that. Okay, so I want to encourage you guys. I do think that this information is really important. I think all the information that's been presented is important, but especially this particular week, because we are going to be talking about interest and compound interest. And the more we understand about interest rates or compounding interest, it will help us make better decisions. It's relevant when we're financing anything from a car or a home or boat, student loans, even, or using a credit card. So when you are completing the problems in this class, make sure, as you've already learned, you have to read all the details, pay attention to the small details. And I also want to encourage you guys, if you don't normally do that when you rent a storage unit, or you finance a car, or you do some other kind of contract, I want to encourage there are lots of times where we're presented with a contract and we think, oh my gosh, I don't want to read all that. Let me sign it. I really want to encourage you guys, not that all businesses are out to take advantage of us, but we should always remember that whatever business that we're purchasing something from or that we're financing something with, it's not that they are in business to take advantage of us, but we need to remember that they're in business to make money, right? So they are, for the most part, going to have those contracts that are written and drawn up that most likely benefit them more than they would benefit you or me. So we should never feel guilty when we say, no, I do want to take time and read that. I do want to try to understand that. So, just to try to be aware of everything that might be in the fine print on that. Okay. So with that said, I am, unless you guys have, oh, look here, I'm going to see, you've got some chat here. Okay. This week was really hard. Yes, Ebony. And I just, if for those of you that just weren't here for the very part of the the beginning of the discussion, I think absolutely everyone thought that this particular week was hard. So yeah, hopefully you'll find that this next week's work, that I don't think it'll be easy, but hopefully it won't be as difficult as it was last week. So don't feel intimidated if you thought that that information was really hard, or something didn't, go as how you thought it was. It was a little bit more difficult, required you to read just a little bit more, watch a couple more problems. You were in light company, because I think everyone was that way. Okay, I am going to share my screen. Okay. If you see my number of slides, please don't freak out. So I don't know if you figured out or not, but each of my slides, it might be 10 slides, but it's really one slide because I have multiple lines of things on there. But we will go until I'll need to wrap up class about 7:15, since yesterday was Veterans Day. I wasn't able to teach my marketing class. So I will be starting my marketing class at 7:30 today. But if we get to something and you guys still have questions, let's say we go right up until 7:15 and you guys still have lots of other questions, I am just like I am always happy to do on one-on-one Zoom, or if there are several of you that are, have questions about a particular problem. So some of the questions that I've done videos on are because I had multiple students that asked me about those particular questions. And if you guys have any constructive information for me on, like, if you watched a particular video, but you didn't find it quite as helpful because it was lacking something, please let me know. So I'm still trying to figure out how to do the math videos and make them good. So if you guys have any insight on how I can make those better, please let me know. Or these PowerPoints, for that matter of fact. Okay, so the first question that we are going to look at is a question from chapter 10. And this particular question, let me see if I can move this. Okay, this particular question is from the chapter 10 quiz. It is problem number 2 on the chapter 10 quiz. So this is what is on my student view. So when you guys go in and look at these problems, you will see 1 or 2 numbers that are a little bit different, but all the wording should be exactly the same. So since you will have 1 or 2 numbers that are a little bit different than what I have, you will still have to work through these steps to calculate the problems. However, you should be able to take the exact same steps that I'm showing you here to help you find the correct answer. Okay, so for this particular problem, you are asked to calculate simple interest. And so in chapter 10, they talk about several different ways to calculate interest. Basically, when you're calculating simple interest, that is time in years. So you always run it. So 1 is 1 year. 1 would represent 1 year. You multiply that times the principal amount. So if you take out a loan for $10,000 for 1 year, the principal amount would be $10,000 and the time would be 1 for 1 year. And then you multiply it times the rate. So if you had a 5% loan, the decimal version of that would be 0.05. Okay. Another type of loan that's presented in chapter 10 is exact interest. So this is calculated a little bit differently than the one we just mentioned. So when you look at exact interest, you use the number of days divided by 365. So this would be for a short-term loan. Sometimes people would take a loan for a 90-day loan. Lots of businesses do these kinds of short-term loans. So if you took a loan out for 90 days, the time that you would use would be 90 divided by 365. I always try to remember exact because there are 365 days is more exact than 360. So use the 365 days for the exact interest. So it's still the same. You have your time multiplied by principal multiplied by rate, just as you would do in your simple interest formulas. And then finally, I don't know if you guys can see the little bar there. Finally, the last type of loan that is presented in, or type of interest to calculate in chapter 10, is ordinary interest. So again, this would be a short-term loan, just like the exact interest is, but you would take the number of days and divide it by 360 days rather than 365. And then you still multiply that times the principal times the interest rate. Okay, on the chapter 2 quiz, guys, on the chapter 10 quiz, problem number 2, here is the scenario that they give you. So they give you the principal amount, they give you the rate, is the interest rate is 10%, and the time or the day, the amount is 1. And they want you to calculate the exact interest as well as the ordinary interest. So these are the knowns that are given: the principal amount, the rate, and the number of days. So a loan for 1 day. All right. So first, let's do on the number of days of the loan. So if you're going to do the ordinary interest, let's see if I have something different. Okay, so on this one, this particular one, even though I have exact highlighted, this is actually for the ordinary interest. So the exact interest should be 365 days. So you would say 1 divided by 365 days for the exact interest. You would multiply that times 0.10 times, oh, I said 10,000 earlier. It's not 10,000, it's 10 million. 10 million. If you compute that or add that into your calculator, this is the answer you're going to get. And again, since I use the 360 days, this is ordinary interest. So I have that again. We'll just walk through that. So if you were to calculate the exact, let's see if I did the exact. So if you were going to do the exact interest, you would say, you would type in your calculator 1 divided by 365. You would take that amount, it's like 0.0027397. You would take that amount times, I'll do that right, 1 divided by 365. You would take that amount times 0.1, which would represent the 10% interest, times 10 million. 3, 1, 2, 3. And the answer for the exact interest, so I do have that number correct up there. It is $2,739.73. So that is the exact interest. And then the ordinary interest, if you were using those amounts. So I think this is interesting when you compare these two. So the principal is the same, the rate is the same, and the number of days is the same. But look at the difference between there. So we've got what, approximately $40 difference. Of course, $40 is not a huge amount of money when we're talking about $10 million, but that was just for one day. So, you know, if that were 60 days or 90 days, that number would increase. So it could make a big difference. Okay. Another thing that is mentioned in chapter 10, I believe, yes, chapter 10, is promissory notes. And when we talk about a promissory note, basically the breakdown of the meaning of what a promissory note is. The promise means it's a promise to pay back the principal, and it's a note to pay that note back to, so it's to pay it back to the lender, but the note is negotiable. So it's a negotiable document that can be transferred or sold. And I wanted to bring that up because several of the problems talk about how different businesses can sell their promissory note to a second bank or to a second lender. And it kind of helps with cash flow. And there are several different problems with that. So just keep that in mind. So basically it's like a note, it's like a check, really. It's like a detailed check, like you would write a personal check. So a business would write a detailed personal check saying, okay, I promise to pay this amount of money on this particular date. And if you need some cash really fast, so let's say somebody has given you a check, this is kind of like how check cashing companies work. You know, you can take your paycheck in and cash it and get some immediate cash really, really fast. So they're not going to wait for that check to clear. You get that money really fast, but you're going to pay some interest. There's going to be some fees associated with that. And in some instances, whether you're a person that's going to a check cashing company, or if you are a business that just needs some extra cash flow so that you can go and buy your materials, or you know, you can pay your vendors to get certain services done quickly so that you can bring in cash from your other customers. Sometimes it's worth it to pay that extra interest or that extra fee just so that you can have access to that cash quickly. Okay, this is taken from the chapter 10 quiz number 22. So this is problem number 22. All right, so in this, what's given to you is they want you to calculate the ordinary interest. And as we talked about earlier, the ordinary interest is based on 360 days. Okay, bear with me here. Ritchie Powers is the owner of American Eagle Boats, a manufacturer of custom pleasure boats. Because of the economic recession and slow boat sales recently, American Eagle has begun accepting promissory notes from its dealers to help finance large orders. Now, this morning, American Eagle accepted a 90-day, 8.6% promissory note for $800,000 from one of its sales dealers. All right. You are the manager for a bank, and Richie is one of your clients. Your bank's discount rate is currently 13%. Now, Richie's goal is to discount the note as soon as possible, but not until the proceeds are at least equal to the face value of the note of $800,000. As his banker, so we're Richie's banker here. So he's asked us to run the numbers at 10-day intervals starting with day 20 and advise him as to when he can discount the note and still receive his full $800,000. Okay, so here's what's given to us for this particular problem. We know that ordinary interest is based on 360 days. We know we have an $800,000 promissory note. We have a total of 90 days at a rate of 8.6%. Now, the first thing that you have to do on this particular problem is find the maturity value with the original bank. So this is not with our bank, it's with the bank that issued the promissory note. All right. In your chapter formulas, you will find that maturity value equals P, it's for principal. Notice this opening parentheses, 1 plus rate times time, closing parentheses. Now, I want to make a note. A couple of times when I was working through these problems, I got it wrong, but it was because once I first started, because you start with your parentheses, I multiplied rate times time and I rounded it. It gave me an incorrect number. So I want to remind you, do not round the rate times time. Okay, so what we know is we know the time is 90 divided by 360, and that's what was given to us in our previous formula, remember, because we're doing ordinary interest. We know that our rate is 8.6%. If we change that to decimal form, we're going to get 0.086. And we know the principal is $800,000. Now, if we plug those numbers into that formula, we will get, so here's our P, our principal, $800,000. Do not forget your parentheses here. 1 plus, now our rate times time. Okay, I should have another little parentheses right here. So on our rate times time, okay, now remember when we're doing, so now we have an equation, and this is how we're going to figure out the answer for this. Remember, we have to use PEMDAS. So the first thing, P is for parentheses, right? So the first thing that we're going to do is look at our parentheses. Typically, we would work a problem left to right, except for when we do parentheses. When we do parentheses, we're going to do the innermost parentheses and then work our way out. So our innermost parentheses here is our rate times our time. So we have 90 divided by 360. So the first thing that you would do is you'd plug into your calculator is you would say 90 divided by 360. And remember, don't round that. Just leave that number as it is. Now, even though actually I didn't need another parentheses, but how we know what we calculate next, because we have 1 plus, but we also know we need to multiply this rate times time. So we figured out our time equation. We always work multiplication and division according to PEMDAS rule. If you go back and look, we would work our multiplication and division, then we would do our addition and subtraction. So once you say 90 divided by 360, the next thing, so when you do 90 divided by 360, you will get 0.25. So the very next thing that we need to do is that multiplication and division. So when we multiply 0.086 times 0.25, you will get an answer of 0.0215. We're still working within our parentheses, right? And the last thing that we need to do within that parentheses is add the 1 to that. When we add 1 to that, this is what we get. Now, our final thing is to multiply our principal times this amount here, the calculation that we've done. When we do that, you will get an answer of 817,200. So that is the original, that's the maturity value with the original bank. Okay, So, you're the member of the bank for Richie is one of your clients. Your bank's discount rate is currently 13%. Richie's goal is to discount. Remember, we just read Richie's goal is to discount that note as soon as possible, but not until the proceeds are at least the face value. So, again, just remind you what we said. So, here's what we're doing we're doing those 10-day intervals. We're starting with 20. So, we'll do 20, 30, 40, and on until we figure out once we get to that full maturity value of $800,000. Okay. So here's our first thing that we're going to do. So now when I say second bank discount, I'm talking about our bank. So now we've already figured out the original bank's maturity value. Now we're going to figure out how we can help him as the second bank discount. Again, our discount. So this is also in your chapter formulas. Discount date equals maturity date minus the date of discount. Okay. So if we're looking at 20 days, so the original day was 90, right? That original loan was for 90 days. So we would say 90 minus 20 equals 70 days. That's our discount period. That's what we're trying to calculate is that discount period. We know that the discount equals the maturity value times the discount rate times time. And again, do not round the time. So if we plug our known numbers now, so here's what we do. So our maturity value is 817,200. Our discount rate is from this particular bank, which is 13%. If you write it in decimal form, you get 0.13. And then we know our time. Remember, our time is 70 divided by 360 because we're using the ordinary interest. When we plug all that into our calculation, the first thing that you will do is 70 divided by 360. And then your next piece, it doesn't matter which one you do first, but you do have to do that because this 70 divided by 360 represents time. So that's assuming you have parentheses around there. So you would say 70 divided by 360 times 0.13 times $817,200, and you get that $20,000. All right. We know our proceeds equal the maturity value minus the bank discount. So what you need to do is take 817,200. That was that original maturity value minus the bank discount that we just calculated. And then you end up with $796. I'm sorry, $796,543. Now remember, Richie wanted you to get something or wanted us to get something that was at least $800,000. So that's less than. So he's going to want us to wait a little bit longer. So he wants us to do in intervals of 10. So we just figured out in 20 days. So next we would need to do is calculate it at 30 days. Okay. So now our knowns are 30 days. So in order to figure out the days, we would say 90, that was original days, minus the discount days, 30 days equals 60. So our discount period is 60 days that we're going to use for our calculation. Same formulas, the discount equals the maturity value times the discount rate times time. So we're going to take these knowns that we know and plug them into our formula. Again, time, our time is 60 divided by 360. So you would want to do that first because that 60 divided by 360 represents one number. 60 divided by 360 times 0.13 times that maturity value that we calculated previously of $817,200. You plug that into your calculator, you're going to get $17,706. All right, we know the proceeds. We're just following that same process that we did for the 20 days. So proceeds equals the maturity value minus the bank discount. that maturity value. There's our bank discount that we just calculated. Look, our answer is 799 $799,494. That again is less than the 800. So we're going to need to take it a step farther. So we've done 30 days. Now we need to look at a discount of 40 days. So same process. 90 days is our time period for our loan. 40 days is what we're looking at for a discount. So that equals 50 days. So that means our discount period is 50 days. So that's the number we're going to use for our equation. Again, this represents time. So it's one number. You're going to do that first. 50 divided by 360. We're not rounding it. Just immediately plug it into your calculator times 0.13 times the maturity value. You're going to get a number of 14,000. That's the discounted amount. $14,755. Again, same thing. Proceeds equals maturity value minus the bank discount. So we plug in our knowns and look, we end up with 802,445. So that meets Richie's requirements, right? Because his requirement was at least $800,000. So we know that that's a good discount period. So that would be the date that we would give Richie. We would say, okay, you can go ahead and do this, discount it at 40 days. Okay. Any questions about that before we watch a quick little video? Make sure I don't have any comments, additional comments.
I just have a comment. I was trying to follow along and write down so that I could see what you were doing, but it's super zoomed in on my end. I don't know if it is anyone else's.
Was it zoomed in for you guys?
Yeah, a little bit.
Okay.
Just a
All right.
smidge.
Okay. I wonder if I put it in on my smaller screen. I'll switch my
It
screen.
was zoomed in for me too, but I was able to click it and move over.
Okay.
I didn't realize it till like halfway through the video, but
Okay.
yeah.
And I will, what I'm going to do, because we're going to walk through several different other problems to include the discussion post, and you might need to go back and watch it. I am going to post, it takes about an hour or two, and of course I'm teaching marketing right after this, but tonight before I go to bed, I promise I will load the video on Canvas where you guys can access it, and I will probably add it as an announcement tab. So that will also generate an email to you with a real quick link to it. So you guys can click that link so that you can go back through there. So I don't want you to think, Tamara, you have to like write notes as fast as you can on there, because you can go back. And the nice thing, if you go back and watch the recording of this, you can speed it up, past, I don't know if you guys ever play with that. You can speed it up as fast as two times and go through it real fast, or fast forward it and get to the spot that you want so that you don't have to, listen to the whole entire thing again.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
super helpful to be able to watch and like pause and then go back.
Yes, just like it on the Master It videos, right? That you have
Yes.
in Canvas. Okay. All right, very good. Well, I will let's see here. I'm wondering. Oops. I'm wondering if, because I had that on a bigger screen, if let me try a smaller screen and see if it condenses it some, because I have a wider screen that was on. Maybe it was accommodating that screen, and since I was sharing that big screen, it might have made it different. So you'll have to let me know if this is better or not. So our next topic talks about break-even analysis. So I do have a couple of other problems I want to get to before we end tonight, but I definitely want to take time to go over the discussion post. I think the discussion post is probably the hardest one out of all the problems, and it's because there's not a lot of content in the chapters that talk about the break-even point and the different assignments or the different calculations that you have to do in the discussion post. But I think this does a good.
When it comes to starting a business, achieve can be exhilarating. However, it's also when the journey.
Whoops. I have no idea what happened there. Did I lose sharing my screen? Stop share. It was weird.
When it comes to starting a business, achieving liftoff can be exhilarating. However, it's also when the journey can be the most perilous. Immediately after launch, the business is working just to stay afloat until the point you know you're in the clear. But what does that mean, and how will you know? It's called break-even, and put simply, it's the point at which a business is neither making a profit nor a loss. Rather, it's momentarily floating in limbo. The break-even point is the total amount of sales a business needs to achieve before it starts being profitable. Or more technically, a business's fixed cost of production, like rent, divided by how much you sell the product for, minus the variable costs per unit sold, like ingredients or materials. How much you sell the product, minus variable costs, is usually called your contribution margin. Confused? Don't worry, here's an example. Let's say it costs Pizza Planet $8 to make one pizza, and they sell the pizza for $12. That means their contribution margin is $4. So, if Pizza Planet's only fixed cost is $500 rent, to find out the number of pizzas they need to sell to break even, they simply divide the rent by the contribution margin. This means they need to sell 125 pizzas, and any pizza sold after that would contribute to the company's net profit. So, you can see by conducting a break-even analysis, a business is able to determine the price of a product, how many need to be sold, as well as identify and potentially reduce excessive fixed costs, ultimately allowing a business to reach profitability and beyond.
Just a quick little, I think a good introduction of. Stop here. Okay, bear with me 1 second as I navigate my technology here. Well, I don't know why I keep. There we go. Okay. So this break-even analysis, this particular chart that you're looking at is included in this week's discussion post. So the break-even point is crucial, just like the video explained, to understanding, like if you're running a business or, managing a business or starting up a business. And honestly, I think that no matter what department you work in, whether you are, a production line manager or you are the purchasing person for your company, or even if you're in human resources, I think that it's essential that everyone within the company understands what the break even analysis is, or the break even point is for your particular company, or at least have a pretty good understanding of what the costs are and what the profit is, and how close that is, and ways that you can leverage that. I think that that's really important information to know, because even if you work for a not-for-profit company, the plan is, every business, no business can sustain for long term where your amount of expenses exceeds your amount of income. You always want it to at least break even, but it's always great. And even not-for-profit companies are expected to make some profit, right? Because they have to be able to figure out a way to bring in income so that they can spend the money that they're spending. So that's no matter what type of company it is, or what part of the organization that you work for. I think that that's very essential information. Okay, so when we look at this particular chart that is included in the discussion post, I want you to notice we've got our x-axis and our y-axis here. So as units sold increase, you're going to move along toward the right side of this x-axis. As your amount of revenue increases, you're going to move up along this y-axis here. And just like he explained in the video, the really important piece right here is you want to be at least right here at this break-even point, so that you're not spending more money than what you're bringing in. Now, one thing that he didn't spend a lot of time talking about in the video are the variable costs and the fixed costs. So these are important to understand. So the fixed costs would be things like rent or insurance. So it doesn't matter. So, like if you're Dylan and you're working in a manufacturing facility, it doesn't matter if he makes one cooler or if he makes 500 coolers. The owner of the company is still going to have the same amount of rent. It's going to cost, the same amount of insurance. So those fixed costs stay the same. When you look at variable costs, some examples of variable costs would be things like raw materials, shipping, packaging, or even labor costs. So let's go back to Dylan's particular example. He was working in a manufacturing facility. If Dylan makes one cooler, he's going to have a different cost, or the company is going to have a different cost. A variable cost will change with the raw materials, because if Dylan's going to make 100 coolers, he's going to have at least 100 times the amount of raw materials than he would if he were to make one cooler. Obviously, I'm making this up, so it might be a little bit different fluid, but it's definitely variable. It's going to change. So if you're producing more things, your variable costs of things like shipping and raw materials are going to change. Now, I also know Ashley McCulpin. She works, I guess she still works for the same company that sells high-end antique vehicles or custom vehicles, just very high-end vehicles. Now, even though they're not manufacturing something, they still have an expense, whether they are purchasing the cars that they're selling or the vehicles that they're selling, or if they're receiving a commission. So if the company that Ashley works for, if they sell one vehicle, or if they sell 100 vehicles in a particular month, the owners or whoever's paying the rent is going to pay the same amount of rent. They're going to pay the same amount of utilities. So those would be fixed costs. But their variable costs would be, if they're going to sell more cars, either they're going to, pay more money out to get those cars in their facilities so that they can sell them. So that's some examples of variable costs and fixed costs. Okay, let's look at our next slide here. All right, here is the formula for the break-even point. We will come back and look at this. I just want you to be familiar with it. So here's how we determine the break-even point. You take the fixed costs and you divide it by, and notice their parentheses. There needs to be parentheses here. Selling price minus the variable costs. Okay, selling price. So if you're selling cars at $10,000 a unit, that would be your selling price. If you're selling a cooler at $5,000, here's your selling price for that particular cooler. The variable cost would be the raw materials. So first you calculate this amount, then you take the fixed cost divided by this calculation. And we'll come back at it. Now, on one of this is regarding the discussion post. So definitely, pay attention to this. Don't feel like you've got to, frantically take notes, because again, I will give you a copy of this video by the end of tonight, so you can walk through this. And I'm using, so on this discussion post, I'm using the exact same numbers that you see on the discussion post. So when you do this discussion post, you can't just enter the answer. You have to show how you came about this. But if you enter the numbers I have right here, you're going to have the right answers. So these are the right answers. I'm just going to walk you through exactly how to do this. So on the discussion post, it tells you that basically you have this imaginary company and you're selling, I think it's phone apps, and you're going to sell these phone apps at $7. It also gives you immediately the fixed cost. So your fixed cost is, I believe, for your salary and a small space that you rent. So your fixed cost is going to be $75,000. Then your variable cost, so that's going to be, that's going to increase. So if you sell more phone apps, this variable cost is going to increase. If you sell one phone app for $7, the cost is 50 cents. If you sell 2 phone apps for $14, your variable cost is going to be $1. Now, the discussion posts tell you to calculate the break-even point in units. Now, what we just covered, here's the formula on how to calculate the break-even point. You take your fixed cost, you divide it by your selling price and your variable costs. So $75,000 will be in your numerator. In your denominator, you have 7 minus 50 cents. Now, this is representing 1 unit. That's the reason why you have to do this first. So if you say $7 minus 50 cents, you get $6.50. Now you can divide 75,000 by $6.50. If you plug that into your calculator, you will get $11,538.46. And I did round that. Okay. So we know that $11,538.46 is the dollar amount to break even. But the question asks us for it in units, meaning number of apps. Even though this formula doesn't give it for this, we can use an equation to figure this out. So we know that $7 is the selling price per app. And we know we need to have a revenue of $11,538.46 to be able to break even. So we simply take this number and divide it by 7. When you plug that into your calculator, you will get $1,648 and then you get this long number. Now, normally we would round this down because we would say 35, we would say in 35, 0.35, or we would round this 8, we would keep it 8 because 3, right, would require us to keep it the same. We wouldn't round out. But we're not talking about dollars here. Now we're talking about apps. And we can't sell a partial app. We have to sell either a full app or no app. So when you're looking at units, always round up to the next one, regardless of what this number is. So the answer to this is 1,649 apps. Now, question number 2, there are 4 questions on this discussion post. Question number 2 is how many units to make a 5% profit? Okay, we know that $11,538.46 is our break even. That's the break even amount. So if we multiply that times 5%, that's going to be the 5% profit, right? So we need to convert our 5% to a decimal form and multiply that times our break even amount. Well, listed twice. When you compute that, when you add that into your calculator, you'll get $576.92. Now, again, that's that's our 5% profit. So what we need to do is add that 5% profit to our break even. When you add those two numbers together, I don't know why I have that twice. When you add those two numbers together, I don't know if you guys can see that, but it's $12,115.38. So that is our 5% profit. So that's the total amount that would include a 5% profit. Now, same thing again. This question asks us for how many units for a 5% profit. So again, we know that our selling price for each of those apps is $7. So we just need to take that full amount that we calculated, divide it by the number of apps, which is 7, and then you get this number. It's the same thing again. You know, we can't sell a partial app. Either we have to sell one or not at all. So you're going to round up regardless of what these numbers are to the right of the decimal. So we will round that up to 1,731 apps. That's the number of apps that we would need to sell in order to make a 5% profit. Okay, on to question number 3. On question number 3, it says you figured out a way to reduce your fixed cost from $75,000 to $65. And if that's the case, it wants you to calculate the brand new break-even point. So we'll do the same thing that we did in question number 1. So we know that the break-even, here's our break-even formula. So we're now, instead of having $75,000 in the numerator, we're going to put $65,000 in the numerator. And on our denominator, because this is representing a number, we're going to have parentheses around it, $7 minus 50 cents. So when we get that, we're going to have $65,000 divided by $6.50. Plug that into your calculator, you get a nice even number of $10,000. So now we know that $10,000 is our money that we need to make, our revenue that we need to generate in order to break even. But again, this is in dollars, and our question asks us to figure out the number of units. So we do the same thing that we did previously. So we're going to take that $10,000 amount of dollars, divide it by 7, and that will give us the number of apps we need to sell. Again, we can't have partial apps. So regardless of the numbers on the right side of that decimal, we're going to round it up. So the answer to that particular question is 1,429 apps. So those are the real numbers that you're going to put in there. And again, when you answer those discussion posts, you can't just put in the answer. You have to tell how you got through that. You can say, okay, I used this particular formula. I plugged these numbers in here. You can put just this basic information that I've included in these slides, and you will be good to go. Okay, we're on to question number 4 of the discussion post. So now it says you made a mistake in your variable cost. So instead of your variable cost being 50 cents, your variable cost is actually $1.15. So now it wants you to calculate your new break-even point based on that new variable cost. So same thing, you're going to use that same formula, but again, you're just going to change that 50 cents to 1.15. You're going to calculate the numbers inside the parentheses first. If you subtract $1.15, you're going to get $5.85. When you divide 65,000 divided by 585, you get $11,111.111111. So we know that's the new amount, the amount of dollars to break even. Again, we need to convert that into apps. So we do the same thing that we did previously. So we're going to take that number and divide it by 7. When you plug that into your calculator, this is the number you're going to get, 1,587 point blah, 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 blah. Again, no partial apps. So you're going to round that up. The answer is 1,588 apps. So that's your new break-even number of apps you need to sell. Okay, so that's the rest of number 4. Before I move on to the next one, any questions or comments about that? Take a breather here.
No, but thank you for breaking that down and showing us that. Really
You're welcome.
helped.
Okay, good. Thank you, Ashley. Yes, and then hopefully that'll help. So those are the answers. So you guys are golden now on
Yes.
the discussion post. Okay, does that make sense, Christine?
Yes, so much more sense.
Okay, good. All right, I started to, because I did have a couple of people that asked me about that, and I thought, nope, I need to make sure I include that in, which I'd planned to include that in our talk tonight, because there's very little information in the chapter on that, so you'd have to do your own outside research, and you guys are working so hard in this class. So, okay, let's share once more. Okay. Let's go over one more problem here. Okay, this is from chapter 11. The chapter 11 quiz, this is number 8. So this will be different because you will have a couple of different numbers than what I have. So you can't just take my numbers, but you can go through this exact same process and come up with your answer. Okay, First Bank has a 5-year CD. So that's a certificate of deposit at 4% interest that's compounded quarterly. So 4 times a year. The second bank is offering another 5-year CD, but the interest rate is 1 percentage point higher. It's 5%, but it's compounded annually. So that means once a year instead of 4 times a year. The question is on chapter 11 quiz number 8, or chapter 11 quiz problem number 8. What is the annual percentage yield? I thought this one was tough because, and I'm not going over A, I'm going over B, because the annual percentage yield, there's not a lot of information in the chapter about this. So I want to make sure I'm giving you the formula that you need to calculate this. Okay. Don't get scared about this. It's not as scary as it looked. Okay. So the rate is always going to be in decimal form, and N stands for the number of compounding periods in 1 year. So here's our formula. So we have our parentheses 1 plus rate. So that's our interest rate in decimal form. N is the number of compounding periods in a year. Closing parentheses, now we have our exponent. And the exponent of this is also the number of compounding periods in a year. And then we take that whole thing minus 1. So that is our formula. I'm going to show you how to do that. Okay, here's the First Bank. So now I've just used this formula and I've plugged those numbers into it. So we've got 1 plus the rate. The First Bank is our 4% rate, but that's always going to be in decimal form. So 0.04 divided by the number of compounding periods in a year. This first bank is compounded quarterly. So there are 4 compounding periods in a year. Closing parentheses, again, that N, 4 compounding periods in a year minus 1. So that's our formula. And you guys have already worked formulas like this. Okay. The first thing that we do is PEMDAS, so the P is for parentheses. So we're going to do the calculations inside of our parentheses. The reason why I divided the 0.04 by 4 first before I did any addition is because we also know from PEMDAS, we're going to do multiplication and division before we do addition and subtraction. If you divide those numbers, you're going to get 0.01. Okay, so that's our next step. Okay, so we're still working within our parentheses according to PEMDAS. So when you add 1 plus 0.01, you get 1.01. So this is, we're just simplifying it and down even farther. Okay, so the next thing that we need to do is our exponent, right? And just like I mentioned in the beginning of the video, and you guys can go back and watch it, but you know, to get your exponent, to get your scientific calculator, you're going to turn your smartphone, you're going to turn your iPhone sideways. Now you can enter in. So if I were going to calculate 1.01 to the 4th power, so I would type 1.01, and then I'm going to come over here and I'm going to find my function that is x to the y power. Then I'm going to enter in the number 4, equal sign, and you get that number that's listed right there on your slide. Okay, so the last thing that we need to do in our calculation is subtract 1. When you subtract 1, this is what you end up with, 0.040604. Now remember, we want to know the percentage yield. So since it's asking for it in percentage form, we're just going to move that decimal 2 places to the right. And in the problem, it explains that you're supposed to round it to the 100th percent, I believe. So just follow the directions on it. I believe it's 100%. Okay, so now we just calculated it for the first bank. Now let's look on how to calculate it for the second bank. So we're going to use the exact same formula, just plug in the second bank's information. So we still have 1 plus, but our interest rate here, as we can see right here, it's 5%. So we have to put that in decimal form. So 0.05 divided by n. Now remember, n stands for the number of compounding periods in a year. And we can see right here, this is compounded annually. That means 1 time a year. So we're going to divide that by 1, closing parentheses. Our exponent is n again. So it's the same number 1. It's compounded 1 time a year, minus 1. We're going to go through the same process that we went through for that first one. So we're just going to apply PEMDAS here. Inside of our parentheses, we're going to do our division first. This is what happens when you divide, or that's the number that you get when you divide those 2 numbers. And then we're still working within our parentheses. You'll get 1.05 when you add those 2 numbers. Now that you've finished the information in your parentheses, so PEMDAS, so the PE, so now we've got our exponent. Well, that makes it pretty easy, right? 1.05 to the 1st power, that just means it's 1.05. Then we'll minus 1, you get 0.05. And again, you need to convert it to a percentage. So just move that decimal 2 places to the right to get 5.00%. Okay, any questions about that? That was my last little slide. Let me stop my share real quick. It's a lot of information we covered, isn't it? Have you guys worked through, just a few of you have worked forward. And for those of you that have worked forward, do you have any problems that I did not cover tonight that you want me to address at some point? Maybe I might have to make a video tomorrow. If it's something quick, I might be able to answer it in the next few minutes.
Not really.
Okay.
So far, I mean, the book helps a lot with all those formulas. But
Yes. Okay. Okay. Yeah. And from what you've seen so far, so Dylan, do you think that the problems and the chapter information is a little bit easier than what it was last week?
kind of, when it comes to simple interest and I'm not very familiar with all that stuff, so it's
Okay.
a little difficult for me.
This is true. You're probably not the good person to be asking for. You're the one that deals with fractions on a daily basis. So, I don't know. What do you think, Christine? Do you think this work is easier than last week so far? Aside from the discussion post, because the discussion post I think is the hardest.
Not really personally, no.
Okay. Okay, thank you for your honesty. Maybe not. So you guys will have to all let me know once you get through that. Is there a problem that you can think of that you're like, I still have questions about this, I've not addressed it yet, Christine?
No, I just go back to the book a lot and using the papers that you gave us.
Okay.
It's the jumping around where you have to figure out what the percentage is on one problem, then the next problem will be days, or, it's just the constant movement.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
Okay.
I just have to use the book and your papers.
Okay. Okay. All right. All right. Ebony, I know you've been plugging away too. Do you have any thoughts or any questions, anything you want me to address?
I haven't went too far,
Okay.
but it seems like it's gonna be harder,
Oh no.
harder, and
Okay.
it's a lot more steps. But
Okay. Okay. The discussion post is a lot harder for sure this week. So if I see that I get questions, and I'll try to look and be a little bit preemptive to think, okay, if there's a question, because if there's one that you guys are just like really stumped on, I do not mind making a video and sharing it with you guys so you have the process, because I want you guys to be able to, I don't want you guys to struggle with not having any clue on how to work the problem, because some of them are difficult. I want to at least steer you in the right way. I may not give you the exact answer, but at least make sure you know how to do it. So, please let me know. Keep asking me questions. Feel free to ask me more questions. I really do mean that. So,
What was throwing me off was the exact and what was the other one? Exact
Ordinary.
and ordinary.
Mhm.
Because I just kept doing the 365 and it was telling me that it was wrong and I could not figure out what I was doing wrong. So I went back to the book and read again and I was like, oh, okay, 360 or 365. You gotta, like you said, pay attention to the wording.
Uh-huh. I would agree. I know it almost feels like a trick question, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
Yeah. And especially just the difference between 365 and 360. So
Mm,
it's not every bank is the same. Okay.
yeah.
Okay. Awesome. Okay. Well, that is all I have for tonight, unless you guys have any other questions. And again, I promise I will get this video uploaded so that you can use that, and hopefully it'll make it easy for you guys to do your discussion post, and so you're not sweating that with your assignments. So